Thank you, everybody, for joining us. My name is Lynn. I am a sales rep here at WarmlyYours, and I am joined by Scott, who is one of our tech team members. And today we're going to be talking about radiant heating done right. We're going to be going over the planning, installation, and some troubleshooting advice for our pros. If there's any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them. If we don't get to them right away, we'll definitely answer them by the end of at the end of the presentation today. So going over today's webinar, we're going to be talking about some planning tips for a successful installation so that you're going into that install with a really good idea of what needs to be done. We're going to go over some of the installation best practices as well, and some common issues and troubleshooting tips. At the end, we'll go over some questions and answers, and we'll also do a little bit of housekeeping. We'll also share some downloadable resources and details on how you can schedule your free project consultation with us, the Radiant experts. So one of the first things that really is going to help with getting your floor heating system installed correctly is proper planning. So let's go over some of the key considerations before installation even begins. Scott, can you kind of tell us a little bit about our SmartPlans and why they are so important?
Well, they give you a clear idea of what's going to be covered on your floor, and it's going to be done in the most efficient way, the best way to do it. And that means no cold spots, no spots where it's going to get too hot, heat where you need it, and no heat where you don't need it, I guess is the way to say that. I'm really bad at
Yeah.
double negatives. But that's what it does with floor coverage. It also includes electrical requirements that tell you the voltage, the number of breakers, what the circuit load is, what your operating costs are. And it makes sure that we know where your power is going to be in the room. So it's drawn per that location. So if that ever changes, you need to let us know. But it's designed for you to let us know where the thermostat's going to be, and then we'll design from that spot. And it takes the guesswork. The number one thing I see with people that are doing their first job is trying to figure out, how do I install it? Where do I put it? And how do I lay it out? Well, we do that layout stuff every single day, hundreds of times per day. So instead of trying to figure out yourself what it is, just send us the dimensional drawing, and then we will do the rest for you. We'll tell you how much power you need. All that stuff will be on the sheet. You don't need to try to fit, well, if I do this many square feet, how many watts do I need? How many breakers do I? It's all on the plan. You don't need to worry about it. So I see a lot of first timers get all bogged down. I don't know where to start. I don't know where to start. Well, the place to start is just send us a drawing.
Yes, absolutely. It's designed to really make that a lot easier for everybody involved, since, like you said, we do it all day, every day. So we do like to consider ourselves the experts. So one of the best things to send in is a sketch of the heated area. It doesn't need to be pretty. We've received them on, the back of plywood and pizza boxes before. The main thing is you want to make sure that the dimensions are on there and that they are as accurate as they can be. And you'll also want to mark any permanent fixtures. So any kinds of like floor vents, plumbing, built-ins, cabinets, columns, anything like that. This way we can make sure to heat in the exact right places and not put heat where it shouldn't be, so that you're going to end up with the right coverage. We're also going to help you determine whether our Tempstone cut and turn mats or our loose cable will be the best option for your specific project.
Yeah, one of the big things I see a lot from people, even from people that have done this hundreds of times, if you go back to the slide before, and I'm going to ask you to look, do you see any vents marked there? Now go to the next plan. Do you see any vents marked there? That's the number one thing that people forget to put in, are the floor vents. So what we do is we do this drawing for you after you send us the dimensions, and we'll send it back to you saying, please verify the dimensions and look for stuff that may have been missed, like this room may be missing the air vents. So that's the perfect opportunity for you to take that plan and go, do these still match up? Because the homeowner decided to put a big freestanding tub in the room. Well, you can't heat under that. So any changes like that have to be related back to us so we can do a design for you that's correct. So that's what we do. We send this to you, say, take a look at it, confirm the dimensions. Has anything changed? Did you forget any vents? Did you forget anything? And if they go, you know what, I forgot the vents, let me mark it up for you. Send it back to us and we'll redo the plan for you. That's no problem. That's very, very easy to do.
Absolutely. And someone asked, is there a cost for the smart plan layout? No, there's not. These are complimentary. And generally, we can turn them around within about a business day. So they're usually pretty quick as well.
Yeah, it's not like you have to wait a week. I mean, I've heard some people say, you know, we went with this hot water. We were going to do it with we did it with hot water and we had to wait for 10 days for our plans to come back. You don't have
Yeah,
to do that with us. We'll have it back for you ASAP.
definitely. So can you kind of tell us, Scott, what we're looking at here in terms of the actual markings on the drawing?
Yeah, this looks to me like I'm going to use my mouse here for just a second. It looks to me like it's an installation being done with ruler cable. And on the ruler cable, we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. But the ruler cable actually has footage and inch markings on it. So if you take a look at the numbers that are highlighted in yellow around the perimeter of this room, those readings are the number of feet that will be displayed on the cable when you get to these points. So you see 100, you see 80 feet, then 150, then 229, then 261. That's so you can keep track. Am I using the correct amount of cable? Am I spacing it correctly? Did I get the cable fixing strips the right distance from the wall? Because if you get them too close together, you're going to have too much cable. If you get them too far apart, you're not going to have enough cable. So those numbers work in conjunction with those green numbers that you see around the perimeter of the room. Like you see at the very top, 6 inches right by the T. That's the space from the wall to that cable. If you work your way around counterclockwise, you'll look that there's a 7 inch. That's 7 inches from that item there on the floor. Then 9 3/4 is the space from the wall to that cable fixing strip. Then down below is 6.5 inch spacing from the wall to that cable. And it goes that way all the way around. If you don't follow those, you're going to run into situations where you have too much cable or you don't have enough cable. So you need to follow those things. In
Definitely.
the upper right-hand corner, you'll see a T in a circle, and that T in a circle is where the thermostat is. We've already talked about that. You tell us where you want the thermostat, and then we design from there because just to the right of the T is a triangle, and that triangle with a 1 in it is cable 1, and that's where the cable starts. If your thermostat is up there in the upper right-hand corner, we're not going to start the cable in the lower left-hand corner. We're going to start it right by where the thermostat's indicated. So if you get to the point where you're checking your dimensions are correct, but they've decided to put the thermostat somewhere else, just let us know because it's going to have to be redrawn. And we'll be glad to do that for you.
Absolutely. So the other part of the smart plan that is super helpful is the electrical details. So we will give you a full electrical plan that looks very similar to this with a lot of really important information that you'll really want to share with your electrician. So Scott, can you kind of tell us what information we'll give on this electrical plan or what, is kind of being shown here?
Yeah, it's telling the electrician exactly what they need to do. All power leads travel back to the thermostat. The heating systems never hook up to each other. You always run the leads to the thermostat and connect them there. Always test the cables. The cables have to be tested with a digital ohm meter. Where to put the thermostat, what size box to use for the thermostat, the conduit, if your conduit is required. All that type of stuff is included. And then it tells you what system is being quoted, what the wattage is, what the control voltage is, and then down below it gives you the specs of that particular cable that's being used in that room. So, and it also tells you at the bottom what the floor load is. That's how much power the floor is actually using per hour. This one is 1300 watts or 1.3 kilowatts. And it will then tell you what size breaker or how many breakers and what size they are. So everything the electrician is going to need to do this job is on this sheet and it comes attached to the installation plan.
Yes, absolutely. We try to make this as simple as possible for you and the electrician.
Yeah, so what you do is you get this sheet, you give the tile installer the install plan, you give the electrician a copy of that install plan and the electrical so he can start working on getting the right electrical parts for that job.
Absolutely. So, which product will be best for your application? We have cable and mesh, and we're going to kind of go over some of the best or how to pick the best choice and how we help decide the best choice for your project. Cable is great for flexibility, mesh is really good for installation speed and convenience, and both work for very long lasting comfort. So first to talk about our Tempzone cable or the loose cable. This is great for custom layouts or irregularly shaped rooms, either with lots of cuts and turns or lots of things to be heated around and kind of, make sure that you're not going underneath everything. It's not just a perfect rectangular space. This is going to be a good option. This also is a great option for flexibility of the wattage output. You can space these as widely or close together as needed to get different wattages and different amounts of power. So Scott, can you kind of tell us, a little bit about this product specifically and why it's so? I know we kind of talked about some of the tick marks on it and how it actually is designed to make that install a lot simpler. Can you kind of tell us, a little bit more about the product itself?
Well, look, it's a twin conductor cable, so it has very low EMF. You don't have to worry about EMF with twin conductor cables. They're very, very reliable. It's a very robust covering on there, and it will work perfectly with the Prodeso and coupling membrane because no matter what size cable, in the old days, if you had a very short cable, it tended to be real big, and longer cables were really thin. So what you will see with this product is that it is the same dimension or diameter, I should say, no matter what the length, because that's going to let it snap into the Prodeso very, very well. So that's what that is doing. It lets you know where you are because you use this along with that installation plan and you know if you're using the right amount of cable or not. Now the cable is going to be the same watts per linear foot no matter what size you buy. It's going to be 3.7 watts per linear foot. The closer you put it or the further apart you put it is going to what's going to change your watts per square foot. The closer it is together, the more watts per square foot you're going to have. The farther apart that it is, the fewer watts per square foot you're going to have. So cold floors need to have the wires spaced at 3 inches. Floors on the second floor or the third floor, above a heated area, they could use 4 inches or 5 inches. You're using the same product, but your spacing is changing the watts per square foot.
Yes, absolutely. And it looks like we have a question from Sebastian. So if you can put that in the chat feature, that would be helpful. Otherwise, I think we are able to allow him to talk. I'm just trying to figure out this on Zoom.
Yeah, I think we should put that in the Q&A. Does that work better at the Q&A, I think?
I think that will be best. Yeah. So if possible, if you could type that out, that would be helpful. All right. So looking at the Tempzone mesh next, this is our Tempzone flex rolls or Tempzone flex roll easy mats. And these are great for those standard shaped rooms. And if you're looking for a very quick installation, these are going to be a great option. They're very efficient. They have the pre-spaced wire already attached to the mesh to make sure that you're getting consistent and even heat coverage. And the wire can also be removed from the mesh as needed to move around obstacles or fixtures in the space. Scott, can you kind of tell us a little bit about Tempzone flex rolls or Tempzone easy mats and where they tend to work best?
Yeah, you can see they're rectangles. So it's going to fit great in a rectangular area, and it's going to be a little more difficult to get it into a curved area, which you can just by taking the cable off. But the number one question we get about this, do I install it so the cable is facing up or facing down? Always install it as much as you can with the cable facing down. Some installation plans may show it with the cable side up just to transition into another cut and turn. So don't be alarmed. Usually 9/10 of your floor is going to be installed cable side down. Notice also that it doesn't allow you to change the spacing of the cable. It's pre-spaced at 3-inch spacing. So you're going to get about 15 watts per square foot in that particular application. So the cable is going to let you change the spacing. This one is not. But this one's is very, very fast. You just roll it out. you cut the mesh, you never ever cut the heating wire, and then you turn the mesh and run it back the other way. So in a rectangular room, you're literally rolling it out, cutting the mesh, turning it, rolling it back, cutting the mesh, turning it and rolling it back out, and then covering it with thin set. So it's a very quick install, but it's going to be around 15 watts per square foot. And for curved areas, you're going to have to take the cable off of the mesh to make it fit.
Absolutely. And these are great for either full coverage, as you said, kind of cutting and turning it to fit in that entire space, or for spot heating. So if you're looking to either save energy and not have the entire space heated, or you just want heat right in front of maybe a toilet or a vanity or under a desk, something like that, this is also going to be a great option for just adding heat to small areas.
And we had the question from Sebastian, and Sebastian says, which option is better for primary heat in kitchen with sliding patio door in the immediate area? Well, the best thing to do is to find out if this can be used at all, and that is to use a heat loss calculation, which is on our website under the tools area, and you can click on heat loss calculator, and that will tell you if the product, either 3, 4, 5-inch spacing, or this product will provide enough BTUs to heat a room. This room has a sliding patio door, which in the business we know that as a heat loss monster. It is every time you open that door, all the heat's going to go out. So those types of rooms, like 3-season rooms with a bunch of windows, sliding glass doors to exterior locations, those have a lot of heat loss. So if you're thinking about, even if you don't have a bunch of heat loss, you're always going to do a heat loss calculation if you're looking to do that product as the sole source of heat. That's the only way you're going to find out, because rooms that are difficult to heat have skylights, have doors to the outdoors from that room, an exterior door, fireplaces, lots and lots of windows, multiple exterior walls. All those things are those heat loss monsters, and they want to wreak havoc with the sole source heating. So always keep track of the heat loss calculator. So hopefully that answers your question, Sebastian. Thanks for asking.
And we do have a question from another guest who says, do either of the products, either the mesh or the loose cable, require a medium? Will the product overheat if it's not in an ideal installation scenario? So Scott, can you kind of speak to that?
Both of these products have to be embedded in cementitious underlayment, which is thin set or self-leveling. So these can never be installed open air because they're not designed for that. They're not UL listed for that. They need to be embedded under thin set or self-leveling, and then have a flooring on top of it, like tile or hardwood or anything like that. But these need to be embedded.
Fully, yes.
Just
So
to
next,
just to give them an additional thing is that if you're looking to do a floating installation, we do have product that doesn't need to be embedded. So if you're doing laminate or engineered wood, you can use our Environ product. 3/8 of an inch of thin set or self-leveling, half inch somewhere, that's going to be the thickness of the product to be embedded.
awesome. Thank you
Great
for that,
question.
Scott. So looking at the installation best practices, great installations tend to start with our expert guidance. We want to make sure that we are helping you through every step of the way. And we have 25 plus years of proven techniques for precision, efficiency, and lasting performance. Whoops, did I do that?
I don't
Where did
know,
it,
but
where did it go? I
it's there
apologize.
somewhere.
I think I hit the X mark accidentally. Give me 1 second here. Now it's not letting me get back. Okay. Presentation.
If I had a wider angle TV or a wider angle screen here, I would get up and do the soft shoe, but I don't know if that's going to help any.
No, 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 please. I'll take care of it. I think we'll be fine.
Yeah, we don't want to see that.
All right. We should be back up and running. Here we go. Apologies for that, folks. So looking at the first step of installation, you really want to make sure that you are preparing the subfloor well. And Scott, I believe this is you in the picture. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about what goes into preparing the subfloor?
Yeah, you want to get the subfloor flat and ready to receive self-leveling primer or thin set. So you're going to, uh, this particular floor had a seam that had a crack that one side was higher than the other. So I had to grind that down to get it a little bit flatter. And then what you want to do is you want to take this and you want to use self-leveling to flatten the um, the flooring, the subfloor, then install your floor heating on top of that. This is a concrete slab, so we would put, this was flat enough, I just needed to get this edge off. So we didn't have to fill this with self-leveling at the beginning, but what we did is we got this flattened out, we cleaned it, we used thin set to attach thermal sheet because you never ever want to put your heating wire directly on a concrete slab because the concrete slab is going to pull all the heat down and your feet are never going to get very warm. We're going to be talking about that in a minute. But that's what we did here. We ground this down, got it flat, adhered the thermal sheet to the slab, and then laid the heating wire on top of that. And then we installed it. But those are the things you want to do. And then before you even do anything, you always want to clean. The number one thing I see when I go to job sites is they're just full of dust. And dust, if you don't clean it up very well, things are going to have trouble sticking to dust. So whenever you're working on this, get it as clean as you can, get it flat, and then you can start building the layers on top of that.
Great.
And if you're
And
using self-leveling, you need to make sure you look on the bag and see if the self-leveling requires primer, because if it does, you need to use primer to make it set up correctly.
yes, absolutely. We always recommend if you're doing self-leveling, hold on to that bag and make sure to read the instructions very carefully. And this is kind of what you had touched on earlier, Scott. I really like this picture showing the difference between an area that has thermal sheet underneath it and the area that does not. So when going over a concrete slab, which tends to absorb that heat, and as you said, kind of pull it down, an insulating underlayment is a really good idea to put down at first so that that heat can rise properly. And Scott, can you kind of tell us what we're looking at in this picture specifically?
Yeah, we put thermal sheet in every part of this room except for that corner. And that corner we left blank because we wanted to have a photo of what it looked like and what you can expect if you don't use thermal sheet. And I can tell you, I've been here almost 2 decades, and I get phone calls from somebody that says, "Yeah, my floor just doesn't get that warm." My first question to them is, was this installed over a concrete slab? And they'll go, "Yes, it was." And then I'll look at the order and say, well, we suggested that you get this thermal sheet so you don't have a problem with heating. And I'll look on there and it was declined. And now they have a floor. They spent a lot of time and money putting a floor in, and the floor isn't cold, but it's not warm. So that's where you're going to be getting those temperatures in the 70s. And that is, you think it's warm, but it doesn't feel warm to your feet. It's just not cold. So that's what your choice is. If you don't use thermal sheet, you're going to have a floor that isn't cold, as opposed to a floor that'll get in the upper 70s into the 80s. So if you're going to go to all that time and effort, I would want a floor that feels warm, right? And those are the people we talk to, are the ones that declined that insulation. And now they've left their floor on for 4 straight days, as high as it'll go, and it maxes out at 75. So that's what you're going to have if you don't use a thermal sheet. And this picture wasn't after all day. This was about 15 minutes. I turned the system on, took the thermal image about 15 minutes later, and you can see after that 15 minutes, it's already 4 degrees warmer, and it'll get warmer as you go. So it's a big deal, and it's very, very important for customer satisfaction to have a warm floor, not just one that isn't cold.
Definitely. Another tip that we always tell everyone is you want to make sure that you are testing your system often. You want to make sure to do it at least 3 times during the installation. We recommend using a multimeter or an ohmmeter to test that it's working before the installation day even begins, and then to test during the installation process itself and after to check for any damage that occurred during the install process and to record the final results in the owner's manual.
Yeah, the number see, we talk to the people that have problems, right? We're tech support. No, people rarely call and go, "Hey, wow, everything was fantastic. That's great. Fantastic." We talk to the people that go, "My floor doesn't work now. Why is it not working?" And the number one thing we see with people is that they don't buy this $20 ohm meter and test the product as they go to make sure it's good. Because all you need is somebody to drop a hammer or to when they're cleaning their trowel, like I've done personally, and even though I knew floor heating wire was there, I still did it. Fortunately, I missed it. I missed the cable, but it can happen to anybody. I mean, even if you've done 100 floors, I've never made a mistake. Well, it's your time will come, right? It'll be the one time. No one's perfect. So you need to have this digital ohm meter. You test the product the day you get it. Then you know, okay, good. I'm ready for my installation date next week. And also, if something happens between us sending it to you and you opening it up, and you can go, hey, something's wrong. It doesn't test right. That gives us a chance to replace it before you're doing the installation on that installation day. So that's what you want to do. And then and you make sure it's good. You lay the product out on the floor. You make sure it's good again. You put tile or whatever over the top, and you test it again. You write that number in your owner's manual, and that's your record of the floor testing good each step along the way. And you're going to find out why that's so important in the next few slides, to know what these numbers are and to know that you had a successful install, because things can happen after that.
Yes.
We had another question from Mikey, and Mikey, is a synthetic cork of any value with an OSB subfloor? And the answer is yes. It's going to be beneficial, but one thing is you don't need to do this for every floor, because remember, if you've got a wood floor and you're on the second floor, second story above a heated kitchen, that floor is automatically going to be 70, 75 degrees. So just use that heat, and that's going to keep that floor is going to be, the floor doesn't have to heat as much. So that's the case where you really wouldn't want it, because then you're kind of mitigating all the heat that's coming up from the conditioned space below. Now, if this were not a conditioned space below, then yes, it will help you. Like if it's over a crawl space, then yes, it would help. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Another way to make sure that you're installing a functioning system is using our circuit check. And this is a great little device. It will be connected to the system during the installation process, and an alarm will sound if the wire gets damaged in any way, so that it can be fixed before moving on to the next step or permanently putting the flooring down over the top. And we always recommend using one circuit check per product. So if you're installing multiple rolls in a room, or you're doing multiple rooms at a time, we recommend getting one circuit check for each of these systems.
Right, because if you hook this up to 3 separate rolls, you don't know which roll is causing the problem. So that's one of the main, technically it'll work up to a certain number, but it just doesn't have enough oomph, enough power to do it. But the thing is, if you're going to be working over all these areas, I'd prefer to know which roll it's in. That's
Sure.
the reason why we suggest one per roll or one per cable, because then this one, you just write number one on the circuit check. And if number one goes off, you know something's going on with roll number one. And that's the best way to approach that. This is done. This page right here shows you how to do your ohms readings. Now, in the temp zone installation manual, this is mentioned 38 times to do your testing. And you would be surprised how many people never ever do testing. So they never know if the wire, something happened to it from after we sent it, because every wire is tested that we send out, but they never ever test it. So they don't know if the problem was caused by the delivery guy, or from somebody that dropped a hammer or dropped a 50-pound bucket of thin set on the wire and smashed it, or somebody put a ladder on top of the exposed wire and crushed it. I mean, there's a whole lot of things that go on, and that's what this digital ohm meter is for, is to do that testing. So another thing that we see, I'm trying to give people hints here, the things that we run into every day. An ohms reading is not just across the yellow and black or the red and black. Those are the ohms of your circuit, of your heating circuit. That's red and black for 240, yellow and black for 120. So if you look here, there are 3 tests, 1, 2, 3. You'd be surprised at the number of people that go, I have a short in my system and my readings across yellow and black are good. What's the problem? Well, because we don't have the numbers from test number 2 or test number 3, and that is from yellow or red to ground and black to ground, because those last 2 tests are the tests you're doing to test for shorts. The first one at the top is the heating circuit test. We don't use continuity reading. We don't use a continuity beeper. We use actual ohm readings because the actual ohm reading numbers are on the label. There's 3 labels on the product itself, 2 labels you can take off and one that's on the cold lead. Those ohms should match. A continuity checker won't give you those numbers. So that's why you need the digital ohm meter, yellow to black or red to black, and then ground to yellow, ground to black. That's the 3 readings that you need to do at each step of the way to verify that you have a good reading.
Great. Thank you, Scott. That's great information. Another thing to consider is the sensor placement. Generally, these come, or actually not generally, the thermostats and the floor heating systems themselves each come with a sensor, and only one sensor can be connected to the thermostat at one time, but you can install a primary and a backup sensor into the floor at the same time as sort of an extra insurance policy to ensure that the system works for a long time to come. So, Scott, can you kind of tell us a little bit about, the placement of these sensors, where they ideally should be located?
Yeah, the sensors need to be placed. They only need to go 6 or 8 inches into the heated area. Uh, we see a lot of installs where you see somebody running the cable the sensor all the way out into the middle of the room. You don't need to do that. You just need to put it 6 to 8 inches into the heated area near the thermostat where the sun doesn't hit the floor in that area. Because if if the sun hits the floor in that area, that floor part is going to get hot and the thermostat's going to think, oh, wow, the floor is 105 degrees. I'm not going to turn it on. Meanwhile, the floor where there is no sunshine is at 50 degrees. So that's why you never want your sensor to be in sunlight, and you never want to run the wire over the heating wire. So you can see there's an open loop in that picture right there. The 2 sensors are just right next to each other. You don't need to put one here and one over there. You just put them right next to each other in that open loop, so you're not going over the heating wire, because eventually if you put it over the heating wire in either a month or 2 years, it's eventually going to melt through it. So you don't want to do that. So one of the number one things when it comes to backup sensors that we find is people will call us and go, my floor doesn't work. Okay, little more information. Why isn't your floor working? What is it doing? Well, my thermostat doesn't seem to be working. Okay, pull the information. Why isn't your thermostat working? Because it's showing 150 degrees on the display. Okay, if you had told me that my floor doesn't work because it shows 150 degrees, I would have known right then that you have both of your sensors hooked up to the thermostat.
Yes.
That's what happens when you hook up both thermostat sensors to one thermostat. The ohms resistance in those you're adding them together. So you're doubling the ohms, and that's going to say, oh, wow, my readings are way off. So you need to watch out for that. So only install both of them, but only attach one to the thermostat. That way, if anything ever goes wrong, you disconnect it and put the other one in, and you're good to go. So that simply means you just take the extra sensor, coil it up, and stick it in the back of the box, where the thermostat's mounted.
Absolutely. Thank you. So in terms of actually installing the flex roll, you had mentioned earlier, Scott, you generally want this cable side down, and you do want to make sure that you're only cutting the mesh. I know we'll probably say it quite a few times here on this presentation, but you never ever want to cut or damage the heating cable itself. You only want to cut that mesh, and you'll want to cut it between those loops so that, again, you're not damaging the cable itself, so that you can change direction and accomplish the layout and the coverage that you're looking for. Generally, you'll use a hot glue gun or staple gun to the mesh itself. You do want to make sure, if you're stapling, that you are not stapling over or across any of the actual heating cables, and this will secure it to the subfloor.
Yeah, one of the main things beginners do incorrectly when it comes to installing the flex roll is they will look at the installation plan and go, okay, it needs to run out here 2 feet 9 inches. Then I cut the mesh and turn it. So what they'll do is they will then do their first panel, and then they'll attach it to the subfloor. Then they'll move on to the next one and run it do the amount of length that they need and do their cut and turn of the mesh and then attach it to the subfloor. And they get to the very end and they find out, oh, I have too much cable, or I'd use too much, or I'd use too little. Then if you've been doing that each step along the way in your room and you find out that you're 5 feet too short, then you have to actually physically start taking out all the attachment points like hot glue or the staples or whatever you used, and that makes it a very, very long installation time. So all you do is you cut it, lay it out, do your cuts and turns, lay it out, do your cuts and turns, do everything, and then if it all fits, then you can go back and start attaching it to the subfloor. Take my word for it. I've seen people turn a 2-hour installation into like a 4 or a 6-hour installation because it takes longer to disconnect the cable and mesh from the floor than it does to put it down.
Absolutely. And
And
Mike, you just asked how much spacing is needed between the rolls or the lines. This photo looks like some of the loops are very close, maybe only an inch or so away from the next wire.
these are designed where you can put the mesh right next to each other. If you are doing the mesh right next to each other, it's best to have the loops offset like this if you can. But installing it like this, as long as they don't touch each other, is usually okay. To be honest with you, people put these right next to each other all the time. I can't tell you the last time I got a phone call from somebody that said my floor failed because the wires, the mesh was right next to each other. It's designed to do that. And I always just say, for safety's sake, do an offset. So loop is here, loop is there, and then you can put the mesh right there because the installation plans are going to have the mesh right next to each other. But that's a great question.
Yes, thank you, Mikey. So another option for install is using our grip strips with the loose cable. And this tends to be the most economical option because the fixing strips are included with the heating cable, so there's no additional cost for them, and it makes it a very budget-friendly option. This also allows for a very flexible layout because, again, you can heat around objects and into irregularly shaped rooms. And it does require manual spacing, so you want to make sure that you are laying the cable precisely so that you are receiving the even heat that you're looking for. Using loose cable also adds a bit to the installation time generally, as these cables must be secured individually. So it's a little bit more labor intensive, but again, this often can be offset with how much more economical it can be.
Yeah, when you're doing a grip strip installation, it's also a good idea to buy a roll of very inexpensive masking tape. And it doesn't need to be wide. It just can be narrow, 3/4 inch or 1 inch wide masking tape. Because if you have a run, because you're just stringing this back and forth in a serpentine manner across this space. So if you're in a 10-foot room, especially if you're doing self-leveling, if you're pouring self-leveling over this cable, it's going to want to flow. And it's going to want to go to the top. So what you want to do is you want to take that very inexpensive masking tape every 2 to 3 feet and run it down across the cables to hold them down. And people go, well, I should get really good tape because I need to make sure that it holds it down. Well, it only has to hold one time, right? It just has to hold it down while the thin set or self-leveling is going over the top. Then its job is done. And you're not going to worry about any adhesion problems because that floor is not going to break up because you used that product, the masking tape. These strips are a new design, and these strips actually, when you run the cable over them and down and around, it'll actually hold on to the cable. So when you do a curve, when you bring it out one side and then down 3 inches across, it doesn't all pull out and get loose. It'll actually hold on to it. We designed it to hold on to that cable without damaging. What you want to do is you want to stay away from those really inexpensive kits that you see online everywhere that have these metal straps that you use to hold the cable in place. First of all, that may not comply with code. You'd have to ask your code guy because a lot of times you can't put this heating cable on metal. It can't be in contact with metal. Well, people that sell these metal strips, those strips are metal. So you want to make sure that you stay away from those because not only you may have some trouble with your inspection, the second thing is if you're designed to put that cable and then bend the piece of metal over the top of it to hold it down. Well, if you bend that over the top and then somebody comes back and they step on it, if you've ever felt the edges on those metal strips, they're very sharp. So if you have somebody step on that loop that you've created and step on that metal piece that's holding the cable down, that can cut it. The thing is with these strips is they're just a little bit higher than the cable itself. And that means if you step on it, you're actually stepping on the strip, not the cable. So you don't have to worry about that. So there's been a lot of thought going into these. They work very well, and they're much, much better than those metal straps, which can severely damage your system if someone walks over them with a cable in them, or if you push down too much, or if somebody uses a hammer to hold it down. You stay away from those.
Absolutely. All right. And our other option when using loose cable is an uncoupling membrane. This is a really great option because it offers faster installation times. It has built-in grooves or channels that hold the cable in place, so it eliminates the need for that manual spacing, and it also acts as a barrier. So this is a great option to prevent any cracks that are in the substrate from actually getting up and reaching the tile or the stone surface. So this enhances the durability of the system and the longevity of any flooring installation. Prodeso is also a waterproofing membrane. It protects the subfloor and makes it ideal for wet areas like bathrooms.
Yeah, the one thing to keep in mind with a membrane is not every floor needs a membrane. You
Yes,
don't need to buy a membrane for every floor. Some companies say you have to. Well, that's the only way that they have to put their cable in the floor is to use a membrane. We know that you don't need to spend that extra money on a floor that doesn't need the membrane. So what you're going to do is for floors that do need it, here you go. It's a perfect way to install it. And our plans will show you the spacing and everything that you need to do to put it in. We'll also do a coverage map of how you need to lay out the Prodeso membrane too. So it is trying to take as much, give you as much knowledge as you possibly need. And it's also waterproof. So if you're going to do a curbless shower, what you're probably going to want to do is do a waterproof bathroom. And the way to do that is with this Prodeso and the seams that waterproof it. So that way, if your curbless shower ever overflows, it goes into a room that's waterproof. That's what's so great about this product.
definitely. And then once the system has been laid out according to that smart plan, now we can start looking at actually embedding the system. So Scott, can you kind of tell us a little bit about this process for properly embedding?
Yeah, this embedding is what we recommend for LVT. LVT is made of vinyl. It has a property that's called drape. And what drape is you take a flat piece of LVT and you put something under it, and then eventually it starts to conform to it. And that's what drape is. And if you were to use a non-embedded floor, you'd eventually see the lines of the cable becoming visible through your flooring. What this does is this gives you a 3/8 to a 1/2 inch bed of flatness that you can then lay your LVT on and install it that way. So that's what's so great about this is you take this product, you cover it with 3/8 to a 1/2 inch of self-leveling, and then you can come and tile the next day after it firms up and you have a nice flat surface to tile to. And that's a really good way to install that particular product. We have a question. Can you install radiant flooring over existing tile over tile, if the tile bed is solid? Yeah, we've had people do that for years. The most important thing when you are doing a tile over tile is that you contact a thin set manufacturer and you ask them the best way to do that, because there are certain thin sets that are used to adhere to the top of the tile. That's what you're worried about, is adhering to the top of the tile. So you're going to talk to a thin set manufacturer. They're going to tell you what type of thin set to use and how to do that. And our only requirement is that it's modified. So yes, it can be done. People have done it for years, as long as you use the right tools. We don't sell thin set. I can't tell you what that is, but there's a lot of big players in the thin set business, and they can tell you which type of thin set to use and if you need to use a primer or anything like that.
Yes, they will be definitely the best resource on that front.
So if we take a look at that real quick at that picture before there, you can see this mat has been attached with staples to the floor, cable side down. And that way, what happens is if you don't do it cable side down, the cable side up, when it starts to float, those loops will come up and you'll see the loops floating to the top of that flat surface. So that's why you need to make sure that it's cable side down and the mesh is holding that down. If you see an installer using staples, it's never okay to use staples over wire. It's never okay to use staples over the cold lead. It's never okay to use it over the splice. So we just had a couple weeks ago somebody that stapled over the wires and their system didn't work anymore. And you just can't do that. Staples go through the mesh, not over the wire.
Great. And when you are actually installing the wiring, the conduit, the thermostats, generally you will need a licensed electrician available. This will be determined by your local code, but it tends to be a safe bet. And you also want to make sure that you are talking to your local electrical or building code authority about actually wiring the thermostat up, making sure that you are following all of their protocols. Cold leads can be run in or to a junction box in the wall so that they can act as a relay and then be connected to the thermostat if you're working on larger spaces. And we had kind of touched on this earlier, but you do want to make sure that that sensor wire coming out of the thermostat is kept separate from the power leads so that there's no interference or issues.
Yeah, the sensor wire can never go in the same conduit as your power leads. Now, where our building sits, it's in city limits. And 2 miles away over there is not the city limits, it's county. So the buildings here have to have the non-heating leads in conduit. If your house is 2 miles over that way, and you're in the county but not in the city, you don't have to have your leads in conduit. So that's why it's so important to know what your rules are, because that's very, very important. Make sure that you install it correctly. And always, always, always make sure you check your code, because in Chicago, just down the road a little bit, the low voltage wires have to be in conduit and the high voltage wires need to be in conduit. Well, Chicago is really particular about that because the whole city burned down once. So they make a pretty big deal about that because they don't want that to happen again. So even low voltage wires in many cases have to be in conduit. So always check for your particular rules.
Absolutely. And Mikey asks, are there requirements for GFCI for the power leads? Can you kind of speak on that, Scott?
Yeah, the product has to be protected by GFCI. That's the National Electric Code says that. And the GFCI protection is pictured right here on our screen. The thermostat has the GFCI protection in it. So you don't want a GFCI. That's another a very good question, Mikey, because another question we get all the time is my floor doesn't work, it just shuts off. And the first question we ask, is it on a GFCI breaker? And they'll go, yeah, because I thought I needed GFCI. So now the whole thing shuts down because when one turns on, the other one thinks it's leakage and it shuts everything off. And now you have a nuisance trip. That's what a nuisance trip is, where the system thinks there's a problem in the floor, but the problem isn't in the floor. It's the problem of the power getting to the control. So that's a very good question. The GFCI is built into the thermostat. So do not install a GFCI breaker.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for asking, Mikey. And we want to go over how to prevent some common issues and how to best install our product. Because obviously an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as Benjamin Franklin said. So this is a really great option or a really great section to pay attention to if you're going to be doing any kind of upcoming installations. We did talk about the circuit check and the ohmmeter and how failure to use one or both of these can cause some problems. So Scott, can you kind of talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I think we can boil down these two things here to say that the circuit check is a constant monitor to make sure that your heating circuit stays intact and that you don't have any shorts. It does that continuously whenever it's on. The ohmmeter is used at the beginning to make sure it's good. Then you put the circuit check on and you lay it out on the floor, either cuts and turns or routing the cable back and forth. And then once you're done with that, you take the circuit check off, you test it with a digital ohmmeter, and you write those numbers down. Those numbers should match the numbers you had at the beginning. Then once you have, and you know that whatever you just did didn't cause any trouble, now it's okay to install the thin set and the tile or whatever you're going to do. Then you put the circuit check back on, and then you start tiling and using your grout or whatever you're going to be using. Then if you hit it, it's going to give you an audible alarm. And it's saying, whatever you just did, you need to stop and look at that wire. And that gives you the perfect chance to go, oh, I was just here. Let me look, let me look. And there it is. There's the problem. So it allows you to get that problem fixed. This ohmmeter is not going to tell you that until the very end. So you need to make sure that's what the circuit check is there to keep track of that the whole time. Then at the end, you then take the circuit check off if it hasn't gone off. You do your ohms readings, and if they're good, you write them down in your installation manual, and you either keep that if you're the homeowner or give it to the homeowner. That's their record that the product was installed correctly and there was no damage to the wire. That's what this whole page is in a nutshell.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mikey asks, if I'm installing multiple sections, would you recommend contractors with only one thermostat or multiple thermostats?
A thermostat can only switch up to 15 amps. Now that could be a combination of 10 mats totaling up to less than 15 amps, or it could be one that totals 14.5 amps. So that's what the thermostat can handle. If you need to do, that's why if sometimes you'll see like the easy mat, we talk about easy mats, and what people will do is they'll buy 7 or 8 easy mats to fill their room. That's counterproductive, because what you really want to do is, if you're going to heat your whole room, use one continuous roll or one continuous cable. That way you only have one connection to make it the thermostat. If you've got these 10 or 8 or 10 mats, you have to get all of them wired together in a junction box and then run that wire up to the thermostat. Because if you have any more than 2 leads running up to the back of your thermostat, you're going to have trouble making your connections and getting it all to fit in that box.
Sure.
So if you have more than 2 connections, you're going to go down to the base of the wall, put a box there, tie them together, and then send one connection up to the back of the thermostat. When it comes to, we were just dealing with this yesterday on a large installation where somebody wanted to use one thermostat to control a big open space, like a library, I think it was like a den, and they also wanted it to control the bathroom that was next to it, which is a really tiny half bath. Well, if you have one thermostat to control that, do you put the thermostat in the tiny little bath that's going to get real hot real fast, meaning that main room is always going to be cold? Or do you put that thermostat in the main room that you spend most of your time in and then control the bathroom? And the thing is, it might be 70 out in the big room. It might be 87 degrees in the small room. That's why we don't suggest using a thermostat to heat separate areas. Heat the bathroom by itself. Heat the large space by itself, because that's what you need to do to make sure that it's comfortable in both places. And people love to do that. And another thing you can't do is if you're doing a big space and this side is wood and this side is tile and they want to put it on one thermostat, you don't want to do that. You need to make sure the temperature in the wood is controlled. It only gets to a maximum temperature. That's why it needs to have its own thermostat and the tile have its own thermostat. So the main temptation is to think of it like an HVAC system, like we've done for the last 100 years. Put one thermostat in the living room and have it run everything. And that's the last thing you want to do with electric radiant floor heating, because the joy of electric floor heating is it's zonable, right? So you just heat this room when you're in it, then you don't heat it. Then you heat the bathroom when you're in it, and when you're not, you don't heat it. So it's hard to get the thing from HVAC forever and ever and ever to start thinking about, how do I heat these rooms efficiently? And that's with multiple thermostats.
Yeah, definitely. Another common mistake we see is just general improper installation. We see splices that are installed uncovered in a wall, insufficient embedding, overlapping heating cables. So we do see a lot of these problems. And Scott, can you kind of tell us what some of the prevention is for these?
Yeah, the simple thing, once again, condensing these things down into a simple statement, is the factory splice, which is the lump at the beginning where it goes from the non-heating lead down the wall Then it connects to the heating wire in the floor. That lump right there is the factory splice. That's where we take the non-heating wire and connect it to the heating wire. Then at the very end of the cable, there's a little lump there too, and that's the end cap where they're put together to make it heat. So sometimes people will call us and go, my floor doesn't work anymore, and we'll have them send us a picture, and we'll see that the factory splice, which heats up, along with some heating wires sitting there dangling in the wall. Well, that can't be put there. The splice heats up. Anything that heats up has to be embedded in thinset or self-leveling. So it needs to be taken out of the wall and put down into the floor and covered with thinset. So that's going to cause it to overheat and fail. So get it into thinset or get it into self-leveling. Also, people say, well, it's so thick that my tile teeter-totters over the top of it. Well, all you need to do is just take a little of the subfloor out with a knife, so it'll fit down in there. If you do that and you plan in advance, it really isn't a big deal. And so you just create a notch in the subfloor to do that. But it has to be embedded in mortar. It has to be embedded in thinset. And one of the main things that's going to cause your system to fail is if you have two wires that heat up and they overlap, because they're just going to burn a hole in each other. That's why the minimum spacing of the cable is 3 inches. If you get it, on the mesh. Now we know that the loops sometimes are closer than that, but if those wires overlap and touch, it's going to fail. It's going to burn through there. So you don't want that. Another thing that a lot of the beginning people don't understand is that you can't go under a built-in vanity, but you can go under a suspended vanity or a wall-hung vanity, because you can't put it under a permanent fixture that's sitting on the floor surface. So this would never go under a bathtub. It would never go under a box bottom vanity, but it can go under a vanity that's just hung from the wall or suspended. So you can do that. It can't go under bookcases. So you would never, like the bookcases you have behind you there, Lynn, we would never install it under those bookcases because it traps the heat. So it can overheat and fail, and it doesn't comply with code.
Absolutely. Other common mistakes we see revolve around the voltage and thermostat capacity. Scott, can you kind of tell us how you would pick out the best voltage for a system?
Well, this is such a good slide because it helps me fight the evil that is the people that say every floor heating system is 240. It is not 240. Every floor heating is not 240. You do not need to use 2 spaces in your breaker panel when only one will do. It doesn't make any sense to do that because 240 heats exactly the same as 120 does. 240 is not more efficient than 120. So if you have a room that's under 120 square feet, you can use 120 volts with a single thermostat and using only one breaker spot. So 120 volt systems with one thermostat can heat up to about 120 square feet. If you want, the only benefit of 240 is it lets you cover 240 square feet instead of 120 using the same number of amps. So that's the only benefit you get out of 240. So if you're going to have a large system that's 135 square feet, you're going to heat that with a 240 heating product. Another big mistake we see is because electricians think that every floor is 240, is we will sell a 120 volt system that works fantastically, but they will just assume that they need to send it 240. Well, when you send 240 to a system that's looking for 120, it's going to go sideways on you. It's going to fail, or probably immediately fail. So what you need to do is, well, they said the thermostat was dual voltage. The thermostat is dual voltage. It will take 120 and send out 120, or it'll get 240 and send out 240. It does not take 240 and convert it into 120 for a 120 volt mat. So if the mat you have installed in your floor is 120, it has to be supplied with a 120 volt breaker, non-GFI. So that's what you're going to see. Rapid overheating. My floor gets really hot. It's great. Well, it's because it's almost ready to fail because it's going to heat up just like that.
Yes.
So if you hook up a 240 volt heating product to a 120 volt breaker, it's not going to get warm. Those are the people that say, I turned it up to 99 and I've let it run for 6 weeks straight and it only gets to 73 degrees. Well, if they're on a wood subfloor, I know that they're sending 120 to 240 because it won't do anything, or very, very slightly. So we talked about 120 square feet in 120, 240 volts, 240 square feet. If you need to heat large spaces like 400 square feet, you would use 240 volt product with a thermostat and a power module. Each power module that you add to the system, the thermostat's going to switch the first 15. Then the power module will switch the next 15. Then the next power module will switch the next 15. And these all low voltage connection between them. They use 3 separate feeds of power, three separate breakers, but they talk to each other with a low voltage connection. When the thermostat turns on, the other 2 will turn on right away. So that's how you do extra coverage on big spaces with electric floor heating when you're going over that 15 amp limit.
Awesome. Thank you. We also see some post-installation issues, one generally being the cleaning of grout lines can cause damage to the heating element. So you always want to make sure whoever is cleaning the grout to do so while the thin set's still wet. And you want to make sure that they, and pretty much anyone on the job site, is aware of the floor heating system that will be installed or is installed under the floor so that they can be a little extra careful around it. Another common problem we find are post-installation penetrations, meaning that once the system has been installed and is basically ready to go, the floor gets drilled into or something happens that can damage the heating element itself and lead to system failure. So you do want to make sure that any kind of door stops, transitions, things like that be done before laying out your heating product.
This is why you need a digital ohm meter to record your ohms readings, because if you had good ohm readings all the way through, now somebody came to drill a hole through your floor for the pipes of your huge standalone tub, or they came to install a door stop, or they put the trim in and that's where you routed your non-heating lead along there. Those are going to be very problematic. The floor worked perfectly until the person came to clean the grout lines. Now, after they clean the grout lines, the floor doesn't work anymore because the person who cleaned the grout lines used a really sharp knife and no one told them that the heating wire was right below that tile, and they went through and they just cleaned those grout lines out. It reminds me of the first job. I've repaired hundreds of floors, and the first job I ever went out on was to a job where they had cleaned the grout lines with a sharp blade and the guy didn't know that there was wire under there. And we had made 7 repairs of each one of those spots. And then finally the guy said, you know what? I did the same thing for the rest of the floor. So you're going to need 100 repairs. And at that point we said, yeah, that's the one case or 2 cases in 18 years where we've had to replace the floor. And when people say, oh, there's a problem, we're going to be talking about troubleshooting. You can find the location. If you have an isolated incident, you can find that spot, lift up the tile, and you don't have to replace the floor. Another common bit of misinformation is that if you have a problem with your electric floor, you have to rip everything up. You don't. You don't need to rip up everything. You just need to make sure that we find that spot using the tools we're going to be talking about.
Absolutely. Speaking of which, we do offer a troubleshooting kit available for rent, and this will have all of the tools that you'll need to find that short and fix it. So, Scott, can you kind of tell us what exactly goes into the troubleshooting kit?
Well, these kits are very expensive, just to let you know right off the bat. And that's why an electrician down the street is not going to have these, because electricians don't run into a lot of floor heating problems. So people will call us up and go, yeah, my guy told me that he cut through a grout line, but I don't know which one. Do you have tools to find it? Yeah, well, can I find a local electrician to do this for me too? And the number one thing you have to remind the customer is these are very expensive, and an electrician's not going to invest $5,000 or more on a bunch of tools that he may be going to use once a year, right? So that's why we rent them. So it allows any local electrician can do this troubleshooting. We do this with local electricians all the time because it's a very simple process once you go through it. So we do this with local people all the time, but they're not going to have the tools, is what I'm trying to get at. So we rent them the tools. They do this troubleshooting with us on the phone, and we will locate the spot. And what happens is eventually, once you get done with all the troubleshooting, hopefully you find that the problem is under one tile. You break that tile, you lift the tile up, you make your repair, and you put the one tile back down. You're not ripping up the whole floor. You're just repairing the spot where it's found. And that's what the thermal camera is we're using these other tools to help illuminate the spot, either the short or creating a hot spot where they've severed through the wire. And then after you do that for a while, you can then take the camera and go, oh, there, I see the hot spot. Or a short is where the heat will go to a certain point and then stop. And where it stops is where the short is. So you just lift the tile there, fix the short, and be on your merry way. The cable fault finder, when I first started here, that's all we had. So this was the only tool that I could use when I started, and it just simply told me how many feet down the cable there was a problem. Well, I didn't know if the installer went this way with the product or if they went that way with the product. I didn't know. I just knew that it was 10 feet or 20 feet down the cable, and it could be anywhere. But what this does is it says, yeah, the problem is like 700 feet away. Well, I know that it's not by where the thermostat is. I know it's probably on the other side of the room. So I'm going to use these tools and look over there, not right here. That's what that's for. So these are the tools that you can get from us. You rent them. We rent them to electricians. And these are the tools that you can use to find where the problem is and fix it.
Sure, absolutely. All right, are there any more questions? I'm not seeing any right now.
We had a question from Jeff that was given to us ahead of time. And Jeff said, is there a guideline for achieving certain surface operating temperatures? So an example, I want a surface operating temperature of 78 degrees. What temperature should I set the system to run at? If you want it at 78 degrees, you set it to 78 degrees because the sensor is in the floor. So the thermostat keeps track of that. So if, to be honest with you, 78 degrees won't feel very warm on your bare feet. Most people set it for 82 or 84, whatever is more comfortable for them. And you just simply tell the thermostat 84 degrees, enter, and it will get it at that temperature. So there's no, it's much different than hot water. Hot water was always a guessing game. What do I turn this thing to make it feel like that over there? And what do I turn here to make it feel? You don't run into any of that. You just turn the thermostat on to there and you're good to go.
Definitely.
We had Charles ask about the total thickness of the system. And I think we kind of talked about that the cables really only, we do a 3/16 of an inch or something like that. And then you do a 1/2 inch or 3/8 of an inch of pour. That cable's included into that 3/8 inch or 1/2 inch. So it really doesn't add anything. You don't take that 3/8 or that 3/16 and then on top of that, it's part of that, right? So you've got about a 3/8 to a 1/2 inch layer of thin set or self-leveling, and then the tile sits on that. So you just add the thickness of your tile. So hopefully that answered your question too, Charles.
All right. So next month's webinar is going to be pro troubleshooting of electric floor heating. We're going to go over a step-by-step guide on how to troubleshoot a faulty floor heating product. And this is going to be on Thursday, April 10th, again at 1 o'clock Central Time. We do offer additional trainings, often by me or Scott, on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays at 4 p.m. And our March promotion is for 2025 is 15% off of select Tempstone products. So be sure to check out our website to learn more about this and any other ongoing promotions. And I believe that is all we have today. I'm not seeing any other questions, so I think we can leave it here for now. Thank you so much for joining me, Scott. It was wonderful to have your expertise. Hope everyone learned a lot, and be sure to reach out if there's questions, and stay warm.
And be radiant. Thanks, everybody.